recently, our Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has been addressing the issue about, for example, the rise in cost of living and as well as this widening income gap through his Facebook page, as well as his May Day speech. I think he mentioned something about this, as well as a few other ministers like Lim Swee Say and probably a few others.
Yeah.
So I know this issue has been existing in Singapore for quite some time, and they have been also recently been trying to let the Singaporeans know they're doing something about it, but it's still existing. So my first question is, do you think that they are really, really concerned about this issue?
I would say they're really concerned because every 5 years you have to have an election, and if you lose the election, you can't be Prime Minister. Right? And of course they're concerned. Whether it can be resolved quickly, of course not. I think it takes time. It's a process. Right? Whether they are doing enough, there are various views about it. I personally think that we can do more in certain areas. For example, housing. I don't know how many of you know how housing is priced. Your housing, when you buy a new flat from HDB, your house price is based on market price around the area, right? So the HDB will say this is how much the market price is. They'll price your flat accordingly, and the government then subsidizes the market price, right? So I don't know what the subsidy amount is, about $1 billion or so a year. The government, there's a transfer payment from the taxpayers, your parents and so on, to HDB, right? And that's how we subsidize it. Why do we do this? Why can't we just, value the land at a lower rate? After all, the state owns the land. It's because we have something called the elected presidency, and all land, whether you realize it or not, is actually part of the reserves, right? So when the government sells the land to HDB, you have to pay market rate. The land has to be market rate, so that it goes back to past reserves. So that's why we go through this process where we value the land according to market value, and then the government subsidizes the HDB. So now, say a 4-room HDB in Pasir Ris is about $350,000 or so, $400,000. My figures are a bit rusty, maybe a bit old, but nevertheless, it's about 5 times the median income. Now, some people will tell you that housing price should not be you should not buy a house that's more than 3 times your income, right? So some people say, okay, this is too expensive, you can reduce the price. Now, I personally think, yes, you can do that. You can't reduce the land price, so what perhaps we should do is increase the subsidy, right? Bring it down to, say, 4 times income or 3.5 times income. Right? You can't just slash the price because the 80% of your people are already living in HDB, so you don't want the market value to collapse. So the question, can the government do more? I personally think yes. I think there are some things that we can do more incrementally, right? Housing, target it, make sure that the benefits go to people who need it, and so on. But the government does a hell of a lot already. There's a reason why, as I showed you in the map, voting for the current government is much support is much stronger in 2-room, 3-room, and 4-room flats, because there's a huge amount of transfer payments. If you're living in a 3-room HDB, you get 5 months utilities paid for, right? That's a huge transfer.
So if they're really concerned over our problems we have here on the widening of income gap, so why did they just bluntly turn down the proposal by one of the professors of economics recently?
Professor Lim Chong Ya.
Yeah. He actually made a very, I would say, quite a reasonable plan or proposal, and yet days later it was being turned down by numerous ministers. They were saying that it was too risky. Instead of actually contemplating each of his ideas, they basically turned it down without any sort of, I would say, thought about it. But what's your opinion?
I don't know whether they turned it down without any thought, because the thing was in fact discussed, it was debated. I don't know whether all of you know what he's referring to. Professor Lim Chong Ya, who's actually my teacher before, is a professor of economics, very, very well-known economist in Singapore. He was former chairman of the National Wages Council, a very prominent economist, proposed raising wages at the low end by, I think, by doubling the wages, right? Was it the proposal? 50% increase over 5 years, right? 3 years, 15%, and then something like that, yeah. And then freezing the wages at the top, above 15,000, freezing the wages for 3 years. The argument, I mean, some people said this worked good work because we have tried it before. 1979, 1980, the National Wages Council, in fact, forced wages up in order to force out low-skilled industry, right? So force out low-skilled industries and force the upgrading of Singapore. But others say that policy led to the recession in 1985. We had a 1985 recession, which was completely self-induced. Costs went up too high, and we had to reduce costs after that. The argument, not only the government, but a lot of economists say that this is not a practical way of raising wages because wage rises should be linked to productivity. So what productivity gains? So what we should concentrate on is raising productivity. Right? I personally think that we may have the truth may be somewhere in between, and that instead of you need not raise wages, need not force companies to raise wages, but we can in fact increase, say, workfare, and workfare can be increased substantially over the same period of time as Professor Lim spoke of. Right? So it's not clear cut. It's not clear cut. It's not that his proposal makes absolute economic sense. All the economists agree with it, and only the government rejected it. I mean, it's not like that. In fact, most economists I know do not agree with the proposal. Right? Okay. Most economists would argue that you have to have productivity gains in order for wages to rise. Right? Otherwise, you have an inflationary situation in Singapore.
By turning down this proposal, right, does that mean they have a better idea and actually a better way of solving this issue in time to come? Because it's just my concern that it may end up to be a continuous cycle again where it's not being solved for, I don't know.
First of all, it's a global issue. Singapore is not the only country that's facing it. There are deep forces, as I spoke just now. There's, what Professor Freeman calls the great doubling of the workforce. There is computers, there is mechanization, or not mechanization, but automation. The people with the right kind of skills gain more than the people with average number of skills, or the average kinds of skills. You can have training for something for work that becomes obsolete in no time, and that's what's happening in America. So even computer workers in America, you are seeing their wages stagnate because of competition from elsewhere. The work can be done by somebody with as much qualifications as you in India or China. So it's a global problem. How do we solve it? Well, there are many ways. There are many things that we need to do. I think we need to, in my view, we should increase workfare slowly, periodically, over the years. We can, in fact, increase subsidies in certain areas, particularly in housing. The amount of you already get about 40,000, 50,000 when you buy a new flat. I think that can be increased so that you can bring down the price of an HDB flat, a new flat, from say 5 times of average income or median income down to say 4 times. So it's more affordable. I don't know whether we will ever move towards a national health insurance scheme for health, but that's another possibility, another idea that has been proposed and has been discussed. And those are the main areas. I mean, and make sure that education continues to be available, widely available, and freely available, as free as possible. Right? We have to continue investing in continuing education, technical education, which we are. We're spending huge amounts of money on that. There is no other way except to retool, retrain, and keep at it. I mean, there is no other solution. It's a global issue. It's not just Singapore. And Singapore, by the way, is doing better than most other countries. If you take the Gini coefficient, when you compare country to country, Singapore's Gini coefficient is quite terrible. I mean, it looks terrible, but Singapore, you must remember, is a city as well as a country. It's really a city with an army, which is what makes us a country, right? But so if you compare Singapore's Gini coefficient city with other cities like Shanghai, even Shanghai, or New York or London, we're not so bad. But that's not an excuse. We have to do better, right? Our median income, as I mentioned just now, rose by 11% over the past 10 years. That's just an average of 1% a year. Right? We have to do more. We have to do better.